Hardware trust foundations matter because every security control you care about eventually depends on the platform behaving as expected at the lowest levels. If the underlying system is compromised before the operating system even starts, then higher-level protections like authentication, access control, and monitoring can be bypassed or manipulated without leaving the usual traces. This is why hardware security is not an optional specialty topic, because it strengthens the entire stack by giving you a firmer basis for deciding what code is allowed to run and what secrets are allowed to be used. When you have a credible hardware trust foundation, you can build stronger guarantees about integrity, and you can make certain attacks meaningfully harder, especially those that aim to persist below the operating system. The point is not that hardware makes systems invulnerable, but that it gives you leverage to verify and constrain the platform in ways software alone cannot reliably do. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the CISSP books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A trusted platform module, spelled out as Trusted Platform Module on first mention, is a dedicated component designed to perform secure cryptographic functions and to protect sensitive keys and measurements. It can be implemented as a discrete chip, a firmware-based module, or an integrated module depending on the platform, but the essential idea is that it provides a protected environment for certain security-critical operations. The Trusted Platform Module can generate keys, store keys, perform cryptographic operations, and record measurements of system state in ways that are harder to tamper with than purely software-based approaches. The module is also designed to resist certain forms of extraction and manipulation, which is important because attackers often target keys and integrity measurements as the shortest path to undermining security controls. When you use a trusted platform module correctly, you are anchoring trust in a component that is intended to be more durable against compromise than the general-purpose operating environment. Secure boot is one of the most visible uses of hardware-assisted trust, and its goal is to verify firmware and boot chain integrity before higher layers are allowed to execute. In a secure boot process, the system checks that the firmware, bootloader, and sometimes early operating system components are signed by a trusted authority and have not been altered. The verification steps create a chain of trust, where each stage verifies the next stage before handing over control, which reduces the chance that a malicious boot component can take over early and persist. This matters because early boot components execute with extremely high privilege and can influence everything that follows, including the ability of security tools to detect compromise. If secure boot is enforced, an attacker who modifies the boot chain must also defeat signature verification, which raises the difficulty and increases the chance of detection. Secure boot therefore acts as a gate that blocks certain classes of low-level persistence and bootkits from executing. Measured boot is related to secure boot, but it focuses on recording hashes of boot components for later evaluation rather than necessarily blocking execution immediately. A hash is a cryptographic digest that changes when the input changes, and recording hashes of firmware and boot chain components creates a fingerprint of the system state at boot time. These measurements are typically stored in protected registers so they can be referenced later during attestation or auditing. The value is that you can detect differences between expected and observed boot states, even if the system did not enforce blocking at the time, and this can support monitoring, forensics, and compliance verification. Measured boot is especially useful in environments where you want visibility across many devices, and you need a standardized way to confirm that platforms started from trusted components. When measured boot is combined with policy, it can support decisions like allowing access only to devices with known good boot measurements. A hardware root of trust is the starting point for verification, and it is the concept that there must be some initial element you assume is trustworthy to begin the chain. Without a root, verification becomes circular because you would need to trust something to verify the thing you are trying to trust. The hardware root of trust typically includes immutable or highly protected code and keys that are used to verify early firmware and establish the initial trust anchor. This root can be implemented through read-only memory, signed firmware with protected update mechanisms, or specialized hardware logic that performs verification. The critical property is that the root is resistant to modification and is protected against easy replacement, because if the root is compromised, the entire chain of verification becomes meaningless. In security architecture terms, the hardware root of trust is the foundation stone that supports claims about platform integrity. Key storage is where the trusted platform module provides direct value, because keys are the lifeblood of encryption, authentication, and integrity checks. Hardware-backed isolation boundaries are designed to protect keys from being read out by normal software processes, even if those processes have high privileges in the operating system. Instead of exposing raw keys, the platform often allows operations like signing or decryption to occur within the protected environment, returning results without revealing the secret itself. This reduces the attack surface for key theft because an attacker must compromise the hardware-protected boundary or exploit the key management logic rather than simply reading files or memory buffers. It also supports stronger key lifecycle management because keys can be tied to platform state, policies, and authorization checks that are enforced outside of typical user space control. When keys remain protected by hardware boundaries, cryptographic controls are harder to bypass through common malware techniques. Platform attestation builds on these capabilities by allowing a system to share evidence of its state with a trusted verifier, enabling decisions based on measured integrity. The idea is that the system can present signed measurements or claims about its boot state, configuration, or security posture, and the verifier can validate those claims against expected baselines. This is especially useful for scenarios where you need to decide whether a device should be granted access to sensitive resources, because access can be conditioned on the platform being in a known good state. Attestation relies on protected keys and measurement records because the verifier must trust that the evidence was not fabricated by compromised software. In operational terms, attestation turns platform trust into a checkable property rather than a vague assumption, and it supports policy-driven access decisions. When attestation is integrated into identity and access processes, it can raise the assurance level of device trust without relying solely on self-reported status. Disk encryption is a practical place where trusted platform modules are commonly used, particularly through the concept of sealing keys to boot state. Sealed keys are keys that can only be released when the platform is in a particular measured state, which means the correct firmware and boot components must be present for decryption to proceed. This provides protection against offline attacks, where an attacker steals a drive and tries to read it on a different system, or after modifying the boot environment to capture secrets. When disk encryption keys are tied to boot measurements, the encryption is not just protecting data at rest, it is also binding data access to platform integrity. This does not eliminate all risks because attackers can still target the operating environment after boot, but it significantly raises the bar for theft and certain boot-level tampering techniques. The result is that device theft becomes less likely to lead directly to data disclosure, which is a major driver of many security programs. Virtualization support features provide additional isolation by separating memory and execution contexts, and modern hardware often includes capabilities designed to strengthen that separation. Virtualization allows multiple isolated environments to run on the same physical hardware, but isolation quality depends on hardware support for memory translation, privilege separation, and protection against side-channel leakage. Hardware features can help ensure that one virtual machine cannot read the memory of another, and they can support stronger boundaries between the hypervisor and guest systems. These protections matter because virtualization concentrates workloads, and a hypervisor compromise can have wide blast radius across many systems. When hardware features reinforce virtualization boundaries, they reduce the feasibility of certain escape attacks and reduce the risk that a single compromised guest can compromise the host. In security architecture, virtualization features are an example of hardware enabling stronger isolation claims that software alone would struggle to enforce reliably at scale. Firmware is a persistent risk area because it operates below the operating system and often has broad control over device behavior. Firmware compromises can survive operating system reinstalls, can hide from typical security tools, and can provide deep persistence for attackers who want long-term access. This is why signed updates are crucial, because update mechanisms are one of the primary ways firmware changes occur, and unsigned or weakly verified updates can become a delivery channel for malicious code. Signed updates create an integrity check that blocks unauthorized firmware modifications, and they also support accountability by ensuring that firmware changes trace back to trusted sources. The operational requirement is that the organization must manage firmware update processes deliberately because delayed updates can leave known vulnerabilities in place, while uncontrolled updates can introduce compatibility issues. When firmware risk is treated seriously, secure boot and measured boot become more meaningful because the underlying firmware integrity is maintained through disciplined update practices. Physical tamper resistance and protections against device theft are part of secure hardware architecture because physical access changes the threat model dramatically. If an attacker can hold the device, they can attempt to extract storage, probe buses, manipulate boot media, or use specialized tools to bypass software controls. Hardware features can make these attacks harder through mechanisms like protected storage areas, tamper-evident designs, and restrictions on debug interfaces, though the practical strength varies by platform class. Device theft is also a common risk driver because lost laptops and stolen servers can become data breach events if storage is not properly protected. When hardware-backed encryption and trusted platform module key protection are combined, the impact of physical theft can be reduced because the attacker cannot easily decrypt data without the correct platform state. Physical security is never purely a technical problem, but hardware features provide valuable friction that supports broader operational controls like secure handling, tracking, and rapid revocation of credentials. Supply chain concerns extend hardware risk beyond your own facilities because you are relying on components and firmware that pass through many hands and processes. Hardware components can be counterfeit, altered, or delivered with unexpected modifications, and firmware provenance can be unclear if vendors lack transparency or if update channels are not strongly authenticated. These risks are challenging because they are upstream of your normal control environment, and detection can be difficult without specialized validation processes. Supply chain assurance therefore includes selecting trusted vendors, validating firmware sources, maintaining inventories of components and versions, and monitoring for advisories and integrity issues that affect hardware platforms. It also includes disciplined procurement and receiving processes so that unexpected substitutions or suspicious anomalies are investigated rather than ignored. In high-assurance environments, these concerns become central because the hardware foundation is assumed to be the basis for all higher-level trust. Hardware trust supports identity, integrity, and access control by strengthening the confidence you can have in device state and by protecting the secrets that underpin authentication and encryption. Identity benefits because device credentials can be protected by hardware boundaries, reducing the chance that malware can export keys and impersonate the device elsewhere. Integrity benefits because secure boot and measured boot provide mechanisms to verify that the system started from known components, and attestation can turn that verification into actionable policy decisions. Access control benefits because you can condition access on device health and boot state, and you can bind sensitive operations to environments that have stronger guarantees about code execution. These mechanisms also support logging and accountability because a trusted platform can help ensure that the system is operating in a known baseline state when it generates evidence. When hardware trust is integrated thoughtfully, it becomes part of a broader strategy where device posture and platform integrity contribute directly to authorization decisions. Secure hardware features establish stronger, verifiable system trust because they move critical security functions into protected environments and make platform integrity measurable rather than assumed. The Trusted Platform module provides protected key handling and measurement storage, secure boot blocks, unauthorized boot chain modifications, and measured boot records, evidence that supports later attestation. A hardware root of trust anchors verification so the chain has a credible starting point, while sealed keys tie data access to known boot states and reduce the impact of theft and offline tampering. Virtualization support features reinforce isolation for consolidated workloads, and signed firmware updates reduce the risk that low-level code becomes a silent persistence layer. Physical protections and supply chain assurance address threats that occur outside normal software boundaries, where traditional controls have limited reach. When these elements are combined with sound operational practices, hardware trust becomes a practical foundation for stronger identity, integrity, and access control across the entire system stack. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.